Hello, everybody, and welcome to this workshop. This is about ARPA funding and other municipal support for libraries. And my name is Joy Worland. I'm the consultant at the Department of Libraries for Continuing Ed and Small and Rural Libraries. And we're going to talk mostly about ARPA today, but also use that sort of as a framework for getting other funding as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Jeanette first, just to do a little intro and explanation about ARPA funding.
Yeah, really briefly, just because there has been so much confusion about ARPA funding, not on you all's part, but more on your municipality's part, where they would often get the ARPA funding confused. So the ARPA funding that libraries have received from us is the IMLS ARPA funding. And once we learned that the municipalities are so confused about that, we've been harping on kind of whenever you talk about the ARPA funding you're getting from the department, always add IMLS ARPA to that. And then the other ARPA is the municipal/state ARPA funding. And that's the money we're talking about in the webinar today, and sort of advocating to get a chunk of that. But all of you should have gotten your IMLS ARPA money and hopefully are spending it, and that should be wrapped up. But I just want to make sure that that point is always made, because that will help you clarify with your municipalities as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeanette. And thank you to all of our guest presenters that are here, and of course, all of you that are attending. So the plan for today is to discuss attracting and solidifying funding for the library to convey the library's role in the community in such a way that funders don't ever forget about the library, right? We want to always have the library be front and center and let everybody know that the library is a community resource that merits strong support. So I'm sure all of us on this call really feel strongly about that way, but it's a matter of communicating it to people who might not really be paying attention to the library, they just don't realize how much it costs to run a library, or some people might even think the library shouldn't get funding. So it's a challenge always to make sure that our communication is getting out into the right people. So we do have some other Department of Library staff on the call, and some librarians and their trustees who will share their stories and successes that they've had in this area. And then Josh Muse is here, and he's also going to talk about using data from the annual public library report to your library's advantage when you're doing budget discussions. And there will be some time for Q&A and discussion at the end. So we are using ARPA funding as a framework because it's such a large and unique opportunity. That's, the once in a lifetime thing everyone is talking about, because that's really true. But a lot of the suggestions and themes you'll hear today are relevant to other funding requests that you will make and other advocacy that you'll do, whether it's to increase annual municipal library funding, just getting funding from other sources, or just generally to keep the library's success and front and center in the minds of stakeholders. So again, getting that message of all the great things we know that the library is doing and how expensive it is to do those things. So it's important to note regarding ARPA funding that earlier this month, the Treasury issued the final rule on how to use those funds, and the ruling gives more flexibility than was initially expected. So the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is a great resource for learning more about that. I'll put a link to their page on that in the chat later on, and hopefully you and your library board and also your select board will take advantage of them as a resource. That might be a thing that you or your library board could remind your select board of if they're not taking advantage of that. So if there's a polite way to do that, that might be something that you could would be beneficial to them and to you. So Jenny Rozicki from North Bennington, the John McCullough Free Library, was going to be here today. She's not able to be here, but she and her trustees have had quite a bit of success getting a significant amount of municipal funding, ARPA funding for their library. And she couldn't be here, but she did give me some notes. So I'm going to share some of her points and some actual things that she wrote out for me. So one of the most important things she said, she and I have had several conversations about this, and I know she's spoken with Jeanette about it as well, but they really made it easy for the select board to say yes. They gave them a lot of information. They did a lot of prep work, so that it was basically the select board didn't have to do a lot of research or figuring out. They were just able to take the research that the library had done and see how it fit into their goals. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that if you can make it put it in the framework that the select board is going to be receptive to and not make more work for them, they're more likely to say yes. So they researched how the money could be spent, where they found that information, and then besides helping them, it made less work for the select board, but it also characterized the library as a research organization, an organization that can be trusted to gather and share accurate information. So that's always a good thing to get out there, because again, we all know that libraries do this, but it was great for them to apply that kind of research to this case, and then also show that they could do it in other situations as well. So this might have a lasting impact on their interactions with the select board beyond this project and this type of funding. So another thing she said a lot was how often they went to the select board. I mean, we all know that adage about it's not okay to only go to the select board during budget time, and that's probably more applicable now than ever with this unique funding. But they really went a lot and worked consistently over years, really, to develop a relationship with the select board and to be present so much that they could never be overlooked. She also pointed out that they had a whole group of people that did this. She, I think, used the word posse. So it wasn't just her, and it wasn't just the even the library trustees. They had a lot of community members, and they would show up as a group at meetings or as a subgroup at meetings. And so it showed an impact of numbers, and then also the diversity of the people that felt strongly that the library should get this funding. So obviously this funding is coming up soon. Town meeting is also coming up soon for your regular budgets. But it's not too late if you haven't already done these years of, connection building that they have done in North Bennington. It's better late than never, and you can still develop those relationships and, start doing it now. I'm sure many of you have already been doing all of this, but, even if you haven't, you can start now. So I'm just going to move into some of the specifics that Jenny sent. So these are in her words. So if it says I, it's her. Okay, not me, just to not be confusing on that. So 1, laying the groundwork for financial support for municipalities by attending select board meetings to share good news about good things happening at the library is the best thing you can do. Don't be a stranger to village trustees or select boards. Stop by trustee meetings with positive updates. Just showing up on town meeting day or at budget meetings doesn't really help you advocate for your library, which we all do hear that a lot, but it's good to have that reinforced. So every library has good news to share. Summer reading was awesome, or we're kicking off winter reading for adults this year. The porch painting is complete. Stop by and check it out. We have Chromebooks to lend out. Those are all examples from Jenny. So this can be a ray of sunshine, hope, positivity in a meeting otherwise concerned with tough decisions, difficult issues, ongoing disputes, etc. Showing up at these meetings makes you and your library a known entity, a known variable. It is harder for a select board and or voters to say no when they are constantly reminded about the good things your library is doing. I aim to provide an update to each supporting municipality, and in her case, the McCullough Library has 3 supporting municipalities. So I aim to provide an update to each supporting municipality at least twice a year, not including budget meetings. It really helps. So her second point is be sure to contact the Agency of Commerce and Community Development to discuss aspects of your project that are eligible for ARPA funding. Every municipality has its own point person for ARPA stuff. Work with them to get your proposal pre-approved and aligned with the municipality's priorities. Do your research and make sure that your shovel-ready project is eligible for funding. The folks at ACCD and the ARPA point person for your town can help. For example, the electrical rewiring essential for computer and Wi-Fi access and HVAC system installation and new plumbing aspects of a much larger building renovation project were eligible for funding. So notice here how she made the connection between electrical rewiring and the library, helping to bridge the digital divide. So we, of course, as librarians, we make that connection, but don't assume that other people will, right? So she actually made that connection for them and went, in case you hadn't noticed this, she made that connection. And so that fit into their priorities and it fit into ARPA's priorities and the libraries. So basically win-win, good for the town, good for the library. So back to Jenny's voice here. Draft a proposal outlining the funding you're seeking. Emphasize that your project aligns with the guidelines put out by ACCD and ARPA. Oh, I already read that part, sorry. Ask to be added to an upcoming select board meeting agenda. Send along this proposal ahead of a select board meeting so they have time to prepare and digest the request. Your local municipality may ask you to demonstrate support before voting on your proposal. We did an easy online Google form, described the funding proposal, asked folks to add their name and to verify that they were residents of North Bennington. Then I printed out the responses and brought them to the select board with me. I emphasized that it was easy to secure these signatures, that residents didn't need much convincing. I had a link to the Google form on the library's website, on our social media feeds, and the Front Porch Forum. I also had print forms here at the library and asked everyone who lived in North Bennington if they would like to sign. So again, getting like, it's not just the library people who want this to happen, it's broad support. And she said, you know, you may be asked to do that. It seems like a great suggestion to, even if you aren't asked to do it, to get a lot of people, you know, behind you on this project. So that, and I love her practical ways of doing a Google form and just getting it all over the place. So, and then here's her last suggestions, which I think is truly brilliant and pretty creative. And again, it's going to have, this is going to have an impact, I think, way beyond this ARPA funding. So offer to help other organizations in town determine their eligibility for ARPA funds and refine their pitch. What select board members here really went for was an offer to help other organizations in town assess their needs in alignment with ARPA guidelines to help pre-screen applications for funding and to make the process easier on the board and the ARPA point person. And then finally, once the project starts and continuing after it's completed, make a huge deal out of the fact that the project was funded in part through ARPA. So again, setting the library up as a research organization that is a trustworthy conduit of information and can be helpful to other organizations, and also making it easier for the select board. So that's all the points I have from Jenny in North Bennington. And I'm going to turn it over to Margaret from the Charlotte Library now to share some of their experiences.
Hi there. Yes. Thanks, Joy, for letting me participate today. I'm just gonna go to my notes so I don't forget anything that I'm talking about. I guess I would echo some of everything that Jenny said, and she gave me some good ideas too, so thanks for that. About staying in regular communication with the select board, and I guess one thing that has been helpful for us is also to be mindful of their limitations and restrictions in terms of like wanting to meet something and discuss it, you know, that they're bound by, like our library boards are, the open meeting law if you're a municipal library. And, you know, frequently select board members are, you know, doing this in addition to a full-time job. So the same way that Jenny said, you know, come and be positive, I think it's also, you know, work with them and, you know, be ready to talk to them when they're available to talk to you. And, you know, that might be a quick phone call in the middle of story time and, you know, you sort of segue away and segue back. And also, you know, I think it's important for the select board to be knowledgeable of the role of the library board and how those two groups can work together to make the community successful, and how the library can help do that. Kind of in line also with what Jenny mentioned, one of the things that has worked well for us is to work as a supporter and a partner. So we've offered to help with information about town events. This has been, you know, as off the cuff as our technology librarian being on hand to set up the projector at town meeting. But we also help to host candidates night and voter registration. We provide information about that. And look for common ground that will benefit the town. We worked with the select board to get an EV charger here. It was originally going to be here at the library parking lot. It ended up being at town hall, but sort of working together ensured that even though there were a couple bumps in the road, that happened. And then I think also I would echo, you know, share all the good news about the library, and, you know, that you are grateful that the town supports the library, so that you can also then go out and get, you know, we've had some good luck getting funding from, say, the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, which has enabled us to, you know, expand on some projects that started with the town. And then lastly, I would just say, you know, advocate all the time and everywhere. It really helps when, you know, a select board member might hear from someone other than the library board or library staff about how, you know, great a program was or how helpful the library has been. You know, that helps them help us. So I guess that's about it.
Great, thank you, Margaret. And again, like Jenny and Margaret both have highlighted that how important it is to have other people telling your story too. So it's, again, it's not just the librarian and it's not just the trustees. But you might sometimes have to ask people to do that for you, right? And you might even like have a script for the trustees, or, you know, say, you know, I know you really come to a lot of our programs. If you ever wanted to, you know, we're able to mention that to the select board. You know, that would be really helpful to us. Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing along those lines? I think one thing that has been helpful for us is to sort of refine our values, I guess you could say. You know, what do we feel like we are bringing to the town and what do we feel like that we share with the town? I think that makes it helpful when you're talking to someone and saying, oh, you just said this nice thing about my weekly book chat, you know, would you mind mentioning that to so-and-so next time you see them? Because we're really trying to reinforce, you know, how we create connections outside of the library walls or whatever. I think if you give them some context, that also helps them, like, oh, I can see there's a bigger picture here, and that can be helpful for them as well.
Yeah, excellent points. Thank you. So we are now going to invite Kathleen Hoyne from the Cabot Library and one of their trustees, Kurt Steiner, to tell us a little bit about their experience. Thank you both for being here.
Sure, thanks. I'm really just going to introduce Kurt. Kurt is our library trustee chair and has been very involved in this whole process that we've been going through to secure funding, this ARPA funding. And he is much better at explaining all the details of how we went about doing this than me. So I'll let you explain, Kurt. Oh, I think you're muted, Kurt.
Man, that happens so often. Thanks, Kathleen. Happy to share, you know, our experience, and I'll get started, and then Kathleen, there may be areas you want to jump in. I think, you know, our experience is similar in a lot of ways to, you know, other libraries and some of what's been described. What I would emphasize that for us, you know, making the process of pursuing the ARPA money part of an ongoing engagement and also aligning it with needs that we'd already clearly identified, you know, and also found a way to demonstrate strong public support, you know, for those efforts was really at the heart of this. Now, just to be clear, we're, you know, Cabot is a small, you know, very small town and very small library. We do not have at this, you know, or up to now, we have not had a dedicated youth librarian to run programs for kids in the community. So it's been, you know, definitely more of an ad hoc volunteer kind of effort. And so first, I want to lay a little groundwork that, you know, what seems to me has been really important, and I mean, this is a thread that everybody's mentioned previously, is, you know, building the relationship with the select board has been really, really critical for us, and very essential for our success. We went through a period of time not that long ago where we had quite a contentious kind of relationship with the select board. Just the composition of the board at the time had a very, you know, it was very control oriented. And we had an experience where we had gone through the normal process of developing carefully our budget, getting our budget, approving our budget as a select board, putting it forward to the town, or as trustees, putting together our budget, submitting it to the select board, and then that particular version of our select board put forward a level funded budget for town meeting. without any advance notice to participants, and also took some actions like stripping some funding from various community partners. So we had to scramble and in about 24 hours secure enough signatures to get a supplemental funding request onto our budget, or onto the, as a question for town meeting day. While this was a very stressful experience, it also was beneficial in a certain way, because the support we received was resounding. We had a great deal of success in quickly getting people to, step up and support us, sign this petition to get our question on the ballot. And then we had a very positive outcome, um, you know, in terms of the vote, which went in our favor, and we were able to secure the funding we needed. And then on top of that, it was just a very strong expression of support for the library and library programs. So that's just the foundation. Partly as a result of that, and just sort of the budgeting process, there ended up being a change in the composition of the select board. Some individuals came in who are a little bit more open and collaborative. And so right from the get-go, we made a decision to, invite, open, honest, direct conversation with that group. I made a strong connection right away with the new head of the select board. And just wanted to get, start off on a new footing, talk about our shared objectives, what we all wanted to see, done to benefit the town. And just got that and started off again on a different footing, a much more positive position. And so that having already been done, we'd also been in a process of, we'd secured some other funding. We secured a libraries building community grant. And as I mentioned before, our library, we have not had a dedicated youth librarian to run programs for the community. This was an area that we, felt there was a gap. And there was an opportunity to explore that in a little bit more detail, especially with the onset of COVID, people being, closed in their homes, often with small children. Just felt that there was a community, specifically parents of younger children, that were not necessarily being very well served or had a particular need at that time. And so we did quite a bit of community engagement. We had structured conversations with, a whole group of parents and caregivers in the community who were in that situation, tried to identify what were some of the challenges they were facing, their needs, what we could do as an organization to help them. And, fortunately, as part of that process, we had a little bit of funding to build some programs, do a little bit more engagement, and try and just give people opportunities to sort of, get out, although in some cases it couldn't actually be out, but to build various programs to support parents and help them to engage with their kids and keep them busy and sort of moving forward. And then also, building, for instance, supporting our, moving our, story time program outdoors and all of those sorts of things. So we had already done a good deal of research, built up, also, identified lots of findings and desires on the part of the community for the kinds of programs they'd like to see. And so even before the whole ARPA process came about, we had already connected with the select board and shared this information, invited them to a separate conversation, had a specific meeting on these topics, and shared, here's a community need. We think as a library, we're in a good position to help serve it, to help supplement what's being done by the public school. And so getting sort of laying the groundwork. And this was really initially with the intention of, pursuing some additional funding, which would be fairly substantial to our annual budget allocation. And then it turned, when we, as soon as it became evident that there was this ARPA funding available, we thought there was a case to be made that this was a capacity building, opportunity, that there was a chance for us to do something a little bit different. And so, we put forward a proposal right at the beginning of this process to make sure that the select board was aware that there was this need that we'd already spoken to them about, which they essentially agreed was the case. And that here was this funding source that we might be able to use to, cover some of this until we were able to, sort of put in a more long-term funding structure in place. So we had frequent meetings with the select board. When they had begun the process, they began a process of soliciting requests or suggestions from the community, and they held a series of meetings, I think 3 or 4, every couple of weeks, where they would invite in organizations to, just share ideas. What is something that we could, here's this tranche of money that we have. These are the rough parameters of how it can be used, and here's the time frame for it. And so we were essentially the first to the table, or one of the first to the table. And there are a lot of, in a small town, there are a lot of needs. But we got in there sort of early with a clear, very well articulated, well documented request, and also all of the supporting information and that we had put out, over a period of weeks prior, or period of months prior. So I guess the thing was that, I would mirror what was said previously, the really frequent communication with the select board, a very collaborative relationship, very open, sort of, starting from a point of where there'd been some tension and saying, hey, let's start it with a clean slate. We're all in this together, trying to serve this community. Here's some ideas we have. And so getting that sort of general feeling of support and collaboration in place early, I think made the whole thing go really smoothly. And I guess the last thing is that, this was all grew out of, I would say, a more forward-looking strategic planning process that we had been putting in place. So, surveying the community, understanding what their needs were, made it that much, and having, so again, being able to document the need was something that really worked well in terms of convincing the select board. So when it finally came up to this time to make a decision, I think it was an easy decision for them to make. Now, again, our current funding structure, we're looking at funding to support a, youth librarian position for, 1 year at present. But there is a willingness, I think, on the part of the select board to explore this, what is the longer term strategy, that there may be additional money forthcoming in future. But in any case, there's just a much more openness and a recognition of the needs of the library and what we can do to support the town. That's a lot of babbling, Kathleen. I imagine there are things you might want to add.
I think the only thing, thanks, Kurt, you showed you are a lot better at explaining details. But the only thing I would add is I think that it also helped to to show some of the numbers involved, some of the like we had some real concrete numbers that showed the surrounding libraries, all of the surrounding libraries of our size already had an existing youth librarian. And we were also able to show that all of the surrounding libraries had, on average, an additional 18 hours of staff time more than we had. And so I think that helped our position. And we specifically asked for $24,000 a year for a 3-year situation, and that would have represented 15% of their total funds. And I think that they saw that as being a reasonable request. And that would put us in line with what other libraries are doing in the surrounding area. It would give us an 18-hour-a-week position.
Yeah, and again, I think that was a big argument in favor of that. There was a clear unmet need for the community. So happy to say that it's, so far been a very successful and a good collaboration.
That's great to hear. And I really appreciate that you mentioned strategic plan, and Margaret had also mentioned, identifying your library's values. And if you've done that work ahead of time, you already know some of these things. You did your community research, you knew what the needs were. And I'm also really glad that you mentioned that comparison to the other libraries too. I'm guessing that Josh will talk more about that too, about, when he talks about the annual report and using it as a tool to show the select board where your library compares, to other libraries in the region and similar size and budget. So, yeah, that's really great. And, I think this is the example, they always say to, use numbers and stories, and you guys seem to be really have nailed that, doing that with the, you have the data to back it up, and then you also have talk to people in the community, and you have information for them. And again, it's not just the library staff and the trustees saying this is a need. It's you've done the research to find out that other people identify that need as well. So thank you so much. We are a small group, so at any point, if someone wants to ask a question, you could just raise your hand with using the little hand raising icon on the toolbar, or type in the chat. And so feel free to do that, and we can leave some time at the end as well. Is there anything else, Kurt or Kathleen, you want to add right now?
No, thanks.
Okay, if you
No,
get
I
inspired,
think
just
good.
leap
I
in.
did see Jeanette looks like has
Yeah,
a hand up.
Jeanette.
Yeah, I really appreciate hearing about how strategic you were. And I put this in the chat already. What you have to imagine, I think Margaret said, your select boards are volunteers as well, and they show up in the evenings, or often tired. If you come prepared with a project that is pretty much wrapped up, completely planned and well thought through, and you have the budget all lined up, and you know exactly what you're asking for, why, that helps them too, because they're seeing money from the feds in amounts that they probably will never see in their lifetime again, or have ever seen before. And it's the same with us. We got $2 million to pass to the libraries within under a year. So if people come to us with really great ideas that are already ready to go, it's easier for us to grant them that money. And I'm sure it's the same for your select boards, who are just completely overwhelmed with having to spend this money in a certain way. And if you've done your research and you know what the rules are, and your project conforms to those rules, then it's even better. And I also like Margaret's idea of making yourself sort of useful throughout the year. Um, and this is what I tell young professionals too, when they say, well, I don't really have a role in when I go to my staff meetings. I say, volunteer, be the note taker, do the tag setup. And it's the same here too, is you want to be the person at the table who's always helpful. That way you'll already connect with them. So I really appreciate your points, and put yourselves in the shoes of municipal leaders who are completely overwhelmed with millions of dollars that they're getting.
Yeah, for sure. And then one other thing I would add to that, I guess, is in real quickly, um, all the frequent interactions that we were having, a lot of conversations with them. We were going to the meetings, we were participating in the meetings, so we had a sense of the kinds of questions they were going to ask, and so we came prepared with answers.
Such a great point. Also, I think that Jenny's notes and Margaret and you all just all talked about the community's needs, and so the needs that the select board might have seen that's independent of any of the library's needs, and making that connection between the library's needs and the community's needs. So it's just a much more powerful ask if it's connecting into those kind of needs that are sort of more universal than just in the library world. And I just really like also that the libraries can do so many different things. They have so many different the staff often has the skill set and the resources, and so a lot of these ideas are just really making the most of some of those sort of actually traditional library gathering of information, but it's kind of framing it in a different way, that and sharing it with people in a different way. So again, just getting the word out to people that might not really identify the library in the way that we are used to thinking of libraries. So this leads us to Josh and the annual report and all that cool data that's in there and fun ways to use it.
Thank you, Joy. And thanks everybody who's already spoken, particularly thank you, Kathleen, for already sort of making my point, which is great and a very kind of delightfully grounded way of showing how you could use the data. But so I'm just going to talk about stats and the annual report, everybody's two most exciting things that could possibly ever come up in a topic. First off, I'm going to kind of talk about generally what you might want to accomplish with stats, and this covers sort of an ARPA municipal ask, but other other times that you might come before the select board or other asks that you might want to make about funding, even outside agencies, all sorts of things. This could be handy. So first off, the sort of base level is you can just use your stats. You should already have all your stats, so you can use them to show basically what you're accomplishing. And to some degree, I mean, you're kind of just showing they're cool and that you're doing a lot. The numbers are big at the end of the day. The numbers are probably bigger than people think they are. And although using just your stats and just for 1 year doesn't really give a ton of context, the main effect is that your library is more active than probably a lot of than the select board might think, or than random people in town might think. There were on the listserv, there were recently a bunch of great infographics that people put together, which were awesome, and that's a great way to kind of get at your stats and make them in an easily digestible format. But I think the big piece there is that you're doing more than people know, and sometimes big numbers help them to kind of conceptualize what's actually happening. Okay, so that's sort of the base level. That doesn't actually require you digging into the annual report. You just get your own stats. Next step, I think, is where you do dig into the annual report. So the annual report has your statistics for the year, and then another, depending on the year, another 155 other libraries who are all scattered, who have all submitted their own data. So you can use that in a number of different ways. The first one is, and this one comes up, I think, relatively often, is to show that you were either underfunded or that you were under-resourced. Basically, you go and you find comparable libraries and you find your information and you show that other comparable libraries are getting more funding, or they have more staff time, or that they're getting something else in that vein, that there's some form of support that they are receiving in a way that is more than you're receiving, and that otherwise you're kind of comparable libraries. So that's sort of the first big way that you can use the report, and one of the more useful things in the report. And again, I will say there are a lot of different pieces you can pull out. The big ones are local tax support and staff time, but you can also look at things like square footage of your building. And then you can get narrower than that. How many computers do you have? How many, how many books do you have? Things like that. So there's a lot that you can pull out from there. Okay, so that's the first option, is basically showing that you are underfunded, that there's that you are represented a little bit below average compared to people around you, or whatever other comparable you're using. The second, sort of the other end of it, is to show that you're really good at something. So you look at the stats, you look at maybe either the kind of some comparable libraries or the statewide medians, and you show that you are way above one of those numbers. And that's a great way to show that you are, what you're accomplishing. It gives a little more context than just, like I said earlier, if you just show your numbers in a vacuum, they're great and they look big, but if you can compare them to other libraries and say, we're in the top third of libraries at programming, or we have, for libraries our size, we have way more Wi-Fi usage, or whatever. There's a ton of stats, so it's just sort of a question of figuring out which ones fit the narrative you're trying to tell. Another thing that you can do, a thing that you can say you're good at, is that you're efficient. And this can sometimes, you want to be careful here, because you're basically saying, for the amount of funding that we're getting, or something like that, the amount of staffing that we have, that we accomplish all this. And that's great. And so you want to be judicious in that, but it does fall into the kind of doing more with less narrative. And I don't know that it's not always the right time to make that case, but that's in there. That's also a possibility. So those are, I think, roughly the biggest things that you're going to do is you're kind of showing what you're accomplishing. You're showing cases where maybe you are not getting the same resources as other people, and then you are highlighting things you're really good at. Okay, so those are sort of generally the big options, the big approaches. Things to keep in mind is your starting point is, what are we trying to make a case for? What do we want to say? What do we want to tell? This is not, you're not doing a sort of a scientific study of the data. You're trying to pull out salient points and prove whatever you're trying to prove. So you want to figure out what that is. The data may help you discover what that is. It may help you figure out points where you are under-resourced or things that you're really good at, or what have you. But you want to figure out what story you want to tell, and then you want to find the data that helps you illustrate that. A few things along those lines. Okay, how to find a comparable library. There are a bunch of different options, and so it's figuring out what is working for whatever you're trying to tell right now. Comparable libraries you can compare based on population. So that's budget. Staffing is a good one that I think is sometimes not, that people don't jump to immediately, but staffing, in many cases, staffing has at least as much of an impact as the budget on places. And there's a relationship, obviously, but and region. People, it can make a better case if you're talking about libraries who are next door and not libraries who are on the other end of the state. So it's worth it to look at all of those options and figure out what's going to work for what you want to say. Other things to keep in mind while you're doing all that. First off, think about your audience. Who are you trying to not convince, but show, who you're trying to illustrate something to? And what do you think, which of these will make a case for them? Some people are more financially motivated, so that might be the piece that they are more interested in. Certainly when you're finding comparables, it may vary. I mean, again, some people may really be interested in who are the 10 libraries around you, and they're not going to care if you point anywhere else in the state. If you show them a state median, they may not care at all. Other people, that's not a big issue. So finding the answer that is going to work for you. Okay, so thinking about your audience. Everybody's aware that during the pandemic, your numbers are all weird. Everybody's numbers are weird. So that's a challenge, and you need to keep that in mind. You can do different things with that, but you definitely don't just want to go in and just throw the numbers out there and be like, I think this should work. First off, it's worth pointing out that different people in the annual report have different fiscal years. And normally that's not that big a deal, but because of the pandemic, and depending on when your fiscal year falls, you might have totally different numbers. There are libraries that, depending on the fiscal year, were open almost no time because they were the July to June period. There are other libraries who are reporting on 2020, and they have a very different experience than people reporting on 2021. So you want to be mindful of that, but also, yeah, you just want to keep that in the back of your head. So what do you do with your numbers if your numbers are kind of down this year, which they are for the most part, except for a few things? Two things you could try. One, you could use in a typical year, which is pull your stats from 2 years ago or something like that, and say, in a typical year, we are doing this. That works best if you're just like saying, this is what we usually accomplish. And you want to be careful of that, because people might kind of dig in and say, okay, we don't care what you're doing in a typical year. But that is something, we've used that in some other spots where we say, in a typical year, libraries statewide have accomplished this. And this year, it's very weird. So that's one approach. Another approach is to say, despite the pandemic, we accomplished this. So to say, despite all that's going on, we still had programming for X amount of people. Our circulation was still this high, even though we were closed for an enormous period of time. And I think it's easy, in many cases, depending on the library and depending on your COVID situation, it's easy to make compelling cases despite the fact that your numbers are way down, because the fact that you accomplished anything with what's going on, I think, is sort of remarkable. So that's so those are something to keep in mind. One more thing, you can use stats that are year over year, where you take the last few years of your stats. But you only want to do that if it tells the story that you want. During COVID, there's a good chance it won't, because it'll just look like you're headed that way. The overall trends in the state and in libraries are such that there are some stats that have been creeping down in the last few years. And so those might not be the case that you want to make. Physical circulation in some places has been going down. So if you're going to show the last 5 years, maybe that's not helping you. But it does give context in a way that just a 1 year stat from one library won't help that much. The last piece I want to say is, whatever you're going to do, feel free to get in touch with me, and I'm happy to help you work on it and figure out what data might be useful to for your case. Figure out what comparable libraries might be out there and who works best for telling your story. And so that's sort of a blanket. Anytime anybody wants to do anything with stats, I'm always available and I'm always happy to help. And then one tiny little thing I'll add on, this is more of a special case thing. If anybody ever needs stats from the census, which is not library stats, but things about your community, always feel free to get in touch. Census has great data, but it's hard to navigate the website. And so, or it can be hard to navigate the website, and I have mild amount of practice with it. So if you ever need information, if you're ever proving a case about your citizens to anybody, I'm happy to help with that. And that's me in a nutshell. So thank you.
Thank you, Josh. That was great. I'm really glad you said that about the census at the end, because the little note I'd written to think about was towns with similar demographics as yours. So even within Vermont, there's not, a ton of difference in that, but there is some difference. And, I'm thinking particularly about, like, if you're in a resort town, then you're not going to have the same comparison. It's as another town that might have the same population, but you have people who have second homes, or you have people that are donating at even though they're not there all the time. So that that census information is really helpful, and thank you for that offer to help navigate it, because it is confusing. And I was thinking, and you may have said this, but like, if there's an area where your library is doing really well and others are not doing so well, I mean, that might be a case that you could make too, just because like, maybe your library still does have really robust print print circulation. I mean, just to help identify that your library is specific to your community, and to remind your stakeholders that your library can meet the needs of your community in a way that no other library can. So the reason you might have some different statistics is because the people in your town want different things, and then that's a way of showing that, and look, we're meeting that need. And the people, however many miles away, might not have that need, and their library's not meeting it. And then also, I don't think you mentioned, like, things like electronic resources, where those have been going up so much, and in the pandemic, and just like using that as a real positive, and reminding people that even just a few years ago, there were people to whom they didn't have interest in that, or they felt it was inaccessible or difficult to use, and that narrative has completely changed, which is a super positive thing for libraries, and we need to be reminding people of that all the time.
Can I interject on or piggyback on that? I think it's if you are looking to do something with COVID numbers, one approach is to highlight things that you weren't doing before COVID, or that jumped up significantly. So things like Joy just said about electronic resources, but also curbside, which most of us weren't doing at all, and the like. It's great to say, look at how reactive we are. This is what we accomplished. We had, a program that didn't exist at all. We had, 700 curbside circulations last year. And I think that can help make your case as well.
Someone has Marie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and quantifying, like, those curbside orders take longer than a person walking in the door and picking out their own stuff. And those take and make craft kits are very time consuming. And so even though it might look from our normal numbers that in stats, that we weren't doing as many things, the people power that it took and the people hours was substantial.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's also, you have the best context for your numbers, so you know what they really mean. And I think it's important to, sometimes people will need context to get that, like points like you just made about what is going into it and what it really involves. So I think whenever you can put a little more detail, I think that's great.
Margaret?
Yeah, just to chime in on agreeing with what Marie just said, and sort of combining and going back to the Cabot Library, sort of combining the numbers with the anecdotes. Maybe some others also saw the Syracuse, they have a new library calculator that factors in labor for things. I mean, I'm not sure it's up to date with take and make or curbside, but it certainly, you know, how gives you a cost for cataloging books and whatnot. And I found even that basic ALA library calculator to be super helpful for just giving people a round number. You know, we're asking you for this amount of money, but the value to our town in terms of the resources that we bring, you know, responding to your requests and everything is so much more.
Yeah, those are really, really good points. Lisa's question in the chat, do you see any way to use the lost revenue area for using ARPA funds to use for construction costs that have increased by 50%? I was just trying to look through my notes and find something. I'm pretty sure that Jenny mentioned that because they're in the midst of a construction project too. It wasn't in the notes that she just sent that I read earlier, but I can look this up. Or Jeanette, maybe you know this as well, but I'm pretty sure that she had an example where they went back because they were in the midst of a construction project and, you know, things cost more. And then they were able to get some money.
Yeah, I'm not sure she argued about lost revenue, but I know that the ARPA funds are limited to specific types of construction. So that's just something to consider. So it isn't, you can't do all kinds of construction. I think Jenny's was about expanding connectivity, right? So ARPA,
yeah, it wasn't
wiring and all of that.
Yeah, but
yeah.
She was
so
able to frame it in that.
Yeah.
But I think I was getting at that she like the construction project, and I think in Lisa's case as well, is you know, has already started, but then you know, things cost way more now than they did when they got the funding for it a few years ago. So does that characterize yours, right, Lisa? Just that, you know, that the fact that just construction is more expensive now, and can that money be used for that?
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, let's ask her. Let's ask Jenny.
Yeah, and I can dig through the my emails too, and I might even find an example. Thank you for adding that calculator, Marie. I mean Margaret. Yeah, yeah. I think I was really excited by that because it I hadn't seen one before that had labor in it, so that's important. Any other questions, comments, suggestions, cool things people have done along these lines? Margaret, it looks like your hand is up, but I don't know if it's just still up or if you have something else to add. Well, obviously this is an ongoing discussion. It's it's particularly vital right now because of the ARPA funding. But you know, as everyone has said, it's an ongoing thing, and building relationships with those select boards, and it helps you at budget time and it helps you at other times as well. So thanks to all the guests and to Josh and Jeanette for your insights and wisdom. I love hearing what people are doing and the successes people are having, and when we get to have these opportunities to share with each other. So thanks to everybody who participated, and good luck with your funding requests.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, I forgot to add, wait, before you leave, everyone, I have a, I know I have one here. I have a have to find it in evaluation. You don't have to evaluate the last 5 seconds of this. All right, here's the evaluation.
Hello. Do you have tests available for people? We do. How many households? There are 4 of them.